In this episode, we break through the maze, and I'm going to give you the best information possible on who killed Jimmy Hoffa and where his body really is. We're going to look at that from the perspective of a cop. We're going to do that on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster, what some people are calling, well, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting. Well, hello and welcome to this episode. This is part 2 of Hoffa, Jimmy Hoffa, who killed him, and where is his body? This and more to come. Well, we want to first of all welcome all you who are our regular listeners. You listen to us every week from the East Coast to the West Coast, and some people around the world. And we want you to know that you are appreciated. Also, I'd like to give a special welcome to any new listeners today. I'd like to invite you to reach out with a shout. That's right, reach out with a shout. That's kind of catchy, isn't it? Well, for all those who do reach out with a shout, you're going to get a reply, plus you're going to get a free gift. It's our way of saying welcome to the Charlie Crimebuster family. And you can reach me at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, also, please, if you do like supporting the brave men and women of law enforcement, standing up for our first responders, and appreciating our military, well then go to our peacemakernetwork.com. That's peacemakernetwork.com. There you can become a badge supporter. That's a BADGE supporter. You can do that with as little as $3 a month, or you can find the area that you're comfortable with. And my friend, it will go a long way in helping our heroes. You can read there what we're doing right now to help our heroes. We're doing it every week. You can become a part of that. And if you happen to be one of our heroes, if you are in law enforcement, a first responder, or you serve or have served in the military, then when you go to Peacemaker Network, please hit that Hero Portal. That's Hero Portal. You can sign up right there, and you're going to already receive some great benefits at no cost to you, including some good ways to enjoy hero getaways so you can get away with you and your family and kind of handle some of that stress that you face. Again, that's peacemakernetwork.com, peacemakernetwork.com. All right, now to our focus. You see, last week we shared with you the early life of Jimmy Hoffa. How as a teenager, that's right, a teenager, he led his very first labor strike. That was on the docks of Kroger. That has since been called the Strawberry Strike. We shared how he became an organizer, how he grew the Teamsters to over 1 million members, and he achieved the position of the national president of the union, the Teamsters union that is. If you have not heard that podcast, go to our, just go to charliecrimebuster.com, our peacemakernetwork.com. You can find that podcast, Jimmy Hoffa Part 1, right there. And we talked last week about how his own necessity, unfortunately, got him involved in organized crime. How that brought on investigations. Oh, investigations there were. And even some of those were led by Bobby Kennedy himself, the Attorney General. And those investigations, after he fought him for all those years of all those high-powered, high-priced lawyers, well, he did go down. He went down for a sentence of 13 years. But he didn't stay there 13 years, did he? Nope. President Nixon, quote, "I am not a crook." Well, he commuted Hoffa. Amazingly, some several $100,000, well, it made its way to his reelection fund. And Nixon commuted Hoffa after just serving maybe 5 years of that prison sentence. And then after his release, well, he was determined. His passion, his ambition was to return to the Teamsters and recapture his own position of president of the Teamster Union. then that, my friend, brings us down to where we are today. The disappearance and death of Jimmy Hoffa, one of the unsolved mystery cases of the nation. Now, my friend, I got to tell you, there is a maze of information out there. That information for you to have to filter to find out what really happened to Hoffa. But no worry, because yours truly, yep, Charlie Crimebuster, I've gone through it. Man, I've gone through mounds of information just so I could save you the trouble. And I'm going to share with you what I think about it. And you're going to look at it from the perspective of a cop. Well, first, I'm going to go ahead and share with you what I call the undisputed facts. Those are facts that, for the most part, that's agreed upon by all serious investigators of this mystery, included but not limited to the FBI itself. It's really simple, my friend. Jimmy Hoffa, he was killed by a mob hit. Now, that's pretty well settled. But the question is why, how, and when, and where is his body? Well, first, let's talk about the why. What could possibly be the motive for killing Jimmy Hoffa, this man who grew the Union to over 1 million members, went to jail for the Union? Well, there are really three main motives. It could be one of these three, or all three, or maybe a combination of one or more. First motive. It is clear that Jimmy Hoffa was going to run for the president's position of the Teamsters. Well, he felt it was his union and his right to attain that, and nothing, by golly, nothing was going to stop him from getting there. The problem was that the leadership of the mob, organized crime, the mafia, well, those leaders, they really were not in favor of it. You see, now they had been dealing with a new president, President Fitzsimmons. He was actually placed there, handpicked by Jimmy Hoffa to take his place while he was in prison. He was going to be kind of the puppet for Jimmy Hoffa to run the Union while he was in prison. And guess what? The mafia, though, they were more happy dealing with him, found him much more easy to deal with than Hoffa. And don't forget, the mob was used to using the Teamster Union for, quote, a blank check for loans for their projects. Projects that were both legitimate and illegal. Hey, guess what else? You know Fitzsimmons, who was set up by Jimmy, who was supposed to just step aside when Hoffa returned? Well, Fitzsimmons, he got to loving his golf games with all the important people. He liked his position. He, too, got a little bit of that addiction to power, so much that he just now isn't willing to step aside. Now, even though the mob, during this time, had sent Hoffa many different messages, all messages encouraging him, well, just to stay out of it, to enjoy his over $1 million pension, to go into retirement. But Hoffa, man, he wasn't even going along with the mob. Even though the mob had warned him about serious consequences of not going along with him. Well, it became clear that Hoffa, he just wasn't going to listen to the mob, wasn't going to listen to the mafia, and thus that becomes what many people feel was a motive for the mob to rule the hit on Jimmy Hoffa. Now there's a second motive, and that one is this. Hoffa, you see, was indicating in his rhetoric as he was making speeches and trying to line up his support to take back the presidency of the Union. Well, he was just indicating in his rhetoric that when he returned, he was just going to cleanse the Union from the influences of the mob. And scattering gossip, well, was that he had already tipped the feds to some criminal activity of the Union, which no doubt could have some mob links. Now, my friend, whether this occurred or not, think about this. Just the fact that the talk was out there, that could have been more than enough to get the mob to act. You see, Hoffa had often spoke of his inside knowledge. And even just the hint that he might share some things maybe that could put the mob members in legal trouble? Well, don't you believe that too could be a motive for the hit? And yet, there's even a third motive for that hit. We're going to discuss that in just a moment. Well, right now, my friend, it's time for what we call here at Charlie Crimebuster, we call it our Crazy Crook Story of the Week. Yep, our Crazy Crook Story. We try to share them every week. And this one, my friend, well, this crook, he gets his credit for his own neatness. That's right, neatness, no problem there. However, maybe he should have taken a little more time to rest up in between his crime and not rest up during his crime. Well, my friend, it appears that a couple had returned home from their vacation to find a real burglar, who we call our crazy crook, fast asleep in their bed. That's right, he was sleeping in the bed. They had come home from their vacation. And if that wasn't surprise enough, well, they found that this crazy crook, he had taken the time to do the dishes. He even washed his own underwear, even purchased some groceries. Now, the couple, they did state that the house was not all that tidy when they left, you see, because they were kind of anxious to get on the road for the vacation. But apparently, this crazy crook, well, he just took time to clean the house up. That's right. Luke Chanjowski, he was arrested for the burglary. Now, the owners went on to say that, well, Luke did burn an old saucepan, but they understood that happens from time to time. Hey, my friend, you might want to bail this guy out, get him over to burglarize your house and tidy up your house. But, my friend, if you were to do that, be sure to leave fresh sheets for the burglar, for he's sure to wind up in your bed. That's right, your bed sleeping while the popo is on the way. And that, my friend, is Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook Story of the Week. Back to our main focus. We've been talking about motives for setting up Jimmy Hoffa for a mob hit. We already talked about the fact that the mob, of course, was concerned about him taking Fitzsimmons' place because Fitzsimmons was a lot easier to work with, and they had access to that big pension fund under Fitzsimmons. He would let it go a lot more easier than Hoffa would. And the second motive we mentioned was the fact that, well, there had been some talk about the fact that Hoffa might be spilling the beans on some of the legal activities of the union, and Hoffa himself had pledged to clean up the union from some of its mob influence. That was the second motive. Well, there's a third one. You see, while James Hoffa was in prison, there was another union leader there, a mob boss there from up in Philly area, and his name was Tony Provenzano. And Tony, they called him Tony Pro. Well, he was upset that his own family was not receiving the same benefits that included insurance for his family and other financial means while he was in prison. The same benefits that he was receiving from the union prior to him going to prison. And Hoffa, well, he refused to help Tony Pro. Now get this, even though Hoffa himself and his own family, well, while Hoffa was in prison, well, the union, they continued to give out to Hoffa and his family his benefits, even though Hoffa himself was in prison. Well, that dispute, and Tony Pro thought that wasn't very fair, well, that dispute became so heated, my friend, that they actually had to be separated from each other as they were fighting in the cafeteria there at the prison. Now, this really should give us a little insight into how bold Jimmy Hoffa was. Because Tony Pro, well, he was a made man in the mob. He had already inflicted pain on others. He was even known to kill his enemies. Yet get this, Hoffa was not afraid to stand up to this mafia leader. Now, my friend, on the most part, you do not want to mess with a made mafia man. And you really do not want to do anything that would hurt their family. Yet Hoffa stood firm against Tony Pro. Now, Tony Pro, he never forgot this, and that hatred only grew between the two when both of them were out of the pen. And this hatred could be a third reason or motivation for the hit on James Hoffa. Now, whether that was the reason for the hit or not, we do know for a fact, and this is one of those undisputed things, it was used, that feud was used to set Hoffa up for the hit. You see, in order for Hoffa to win in the coming Union election, well, he needed the delegates that Tony the Pro controlled in the upper East Coast. And in order to procure those votes, well, it would require for the two to sit down and settle the difference. Hoffa needed to get Tony's endorsement. And that was the meeting that was set up. Now to execute the hit on Hoffa. Now, this is one of those areas that is not without dispute. Seasoned investigators all agree and all believe that that's exactly what happened, because they had all kinds of people giving them the backstory of why a meeting was planned for Hoffa to sit down with Tony Pro. Now, the Giacalone brothers, they were in Detroit. They were some of the mob leaders there in Detroit, and they were the ones that were actually working as a go-between between Hoffa and Tony the Pro. And they had set up a meeting for them on July the 30th, 1975, at the Marcus Red Fox Restaurant. Now, the Marcus Red Fox Restaurant was just a little bit north of Detroit. That meeting was set up on July the 30th. Now, again, that's not without dispute. This meeting was going to be happening approximately 2 or 2:30 p.m. on July the 30th. Now, what happened to Hoffa from there on, from that meeting? Well, it's filled with very few facts and a whole lot of speculation and probabilities. Now, one of the most common stories about what happened to Hoffa, it comes from a movie that was just recently released a couple years ago called The Irishman. And that was from a book that was written, and that book was called I Paint Houses. Now, you're probably familiar with it. You probably saw the movie. It alleges that a trusted friend of Hoffa, an associate with the mob, a guy by the name of Frank Sharon, that he and his wife was driving to the Detroit area from Pennsylvania to attend a wedding of a close person that they all knew. He was actually one of the attorney's son that was getting married that took care of the mob. And so he was driving up there with another crime boss and his wife. And the two couples, stopped off for a layover on the way up. Well, according to the story, Frank Sharon allegedly followed directions from the mob, took a plane to fly forward into Detroit, way ahead of them, met up with other mafia connections. From there, they took a car to pick up Hoffa at the restaurant parking lot, took him to a house, and Frank, who Hoffa would trust, who would get in the car with him and go to the house, that this trusted friend, Frank Sharon, upon orders from the mob, then killed Hoffa, shot him in the head 2 times. Now, again, according to the story, Frank had confessed this to a priest and to other people on his deathbed. Now, he was able to describe the house that they took Hoffa to, and they did find some blood there at that house. That was through an independent investigation, but the blood was not conclusively from Hoffa. In fact, no DNA or blood was really attached to Hoffa in that investigation. So while this makes a really, really great movie and crime story, well, most serious investigators and law enforcement, they kind of doubt this version of events. They discount it for a number of reasons. First, the house was a distance away from the restaurant. Many do not think that Hoffa would agree for a meeting that far away. Next, it's really difficult to source out who really owned the home. And the control that the mafia would have in a home that they weren't familiar with would not be near as possible as in some other places to kill Hoffa. And then Sharon, well, he was well known for his lying continually. Somewhat of a blowhard, Plus, he was broke while he was dying, and he had a real financial reason for selling the story. Now, many believe that the Detroit mob would not need to send someone from Pennsylvania to come and do the hit. The Detroit mob was very capable of handling it all on their own. However, I will say FBI investigation does place him in the area at the time of the hit, but so were a whole lot of mafia people coming in for that wedding that many of them were attending. Some investigators believe that he could have been used to lure Hoffa to the scene, but are very, very doubtful that he really pulled the trigger. So what is the other speculation that most investigators believe? Well, most of law enforcement, they believe that this was carried out as a basic mob hit. They believe that the Tony Pro meeting was indeed the setup to get him and lure him away. They believe that the Giacalone brothers, well, they were mostly responsible for setting up the hit. And while Tony Giacalone went to great lengths to set up an alibi at the Southfield Athletic Club in Detroit, well, his brother Billy, that's a little different story. Because Billy Giacalone, he had actually ditched an FBI surveillance team that was on him. And they believe that he was a part of the actual kidnapping. Now, there are other people, Thomas Andretta, Salvatore Bergado, and Gabriel Bergado. It is believed that they were the biggest part of this hit. It is also believed by many that Chucky O'Brien, who was a somewhat adopted son of Hoffa, that he was the one who actually drove the car that picked up Hoffa at the restaurant's parking lot. You see, that Chucky O'Brien, he and Hoffa, they were on the outs at that time. Plus, Chucky, he owed a lot of money to Tony the Pro and others, and he was wanting to make his own bones in the mob. And so many believe that he may have been the one that drove the car that took Hoffa to his murder. Now, most people believe it was at a house called the Cadado House, which was mob-owned from one that was a part of the mob. And this house was somewhat set back from the road. It wasn't really there in plain sight. Also had a drive-in garage so that you could keep all this going out of sight. Just drive the car under the garage and then go up the stairs. They believe that that was the place where the hit really took place. And that house, was not very far from the meeting site. It was only about 3 to 5 minutes away. And most believe it was Sal. They called him Sal. That Sal was the one who actually pulled the trigger. You see, it really boils down, I believe, when you take all of the stuff that you read and all the static away, it really boils down to whether you believe that Frank Sheeran, from that movie called The Irishman, was he the trigger man or was Salvatore the trigger man? Now, interesting enough, Sal, well, he was shot and killed just a couple years later. At the bottom line again, my friend, this is a mob hit, clearly and simply. You see, investigators know who was involved, but they do not have the clear evidence to prove it. You see, there were over 22 people that were involved. Over 22 people that were involved who actually invoked their Fifth Amendment rights when they were called on to testify before a grand jury. No, this hit was well thought out and planned. No one really even talked about this, even on FBI surveillance bugs. They took extra care to keep this one on the down and low, to avoid being arrested and convicted for the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. But next, my friend, what really happened to his body? We're going to tell you exactly what we believe happened to the body in a moment. But now it's time for what we call our Courageous Citizen Story of the Week. And this one, my friend, comes to us from Harris County, Texas. That's right. On July the 5th. This is what KHOU reports. You see, the sheriff's office there reported a woman was outside of her apartment. She was celebrating the 4th of July with the neighbors. That's when her son showed up acting a little strange. The mother and her son then went into her apartment, and shortly thereafter, this son begins to shoot an AK-47 rifle out of the windows of the residence. Those bullets even sprayed into an apartment next door. That's where a 16-year-old girl was at a dining room table, but thankfully she was not hit. The son actually even stood over his mom, shot her 3 or 4 times, when a good Samaritan there in the neighbor, took the gun, his own gun out, and shot the suspect that was holding a rifle. That wounded mom, well, she was transported to the hospital, but she's expected to live. Now, the sheriff said that woman would not have survived without the heroic acts of a man who was there and took the courage to take out a man with an AK-47. He took that man out with his own gun. So, my friend, here is a good man with a pistol who takes out a bad man with an AK-47. And that, my friend, is what we call our courageous citizen of the week. Now back to our main focus. We all know that Hoffa was set up and killed, but what really happened to his body? Well, here's where speculation runs really wild. And there's a reason for that. You see, it's been claimed that Hoffa, well, some people said he was buried under the Giant Stadium. Someone else said under a swimming pool that was constructed in the middle of the night. Some people said he was ground up like beef and fed to the fishes off the shore. Some even said he was fed to alligators right here in my home state of Florida. Another, they said he was buried under a golf course in Georgia. And some people even told the police that he was ground up and shipped in parts to Japan. Well, one of the reasons for all this is, according to sources, well, the mob, while quiet about the whodunit, well, they wanted to get out all kinds of stories about where the body was, and they launched a misinformation campaign. Yep, long before social media and the Russian misinformation campaign, well, in fact, probably the Russians could learn from the mob on this one. They did. They spun yarn after yarn after yarn about where the body was. But what about the body? Where is it? Well, there are 2 main thoughts on the body of James Hoffa from serious investigators. Well, in that book we talked about, I Paint Houses, where Sharon says it was all departmentalized. In other words, one part did not know what the other part was doing. And so there were people there to take the body that he didn't know about, didn't know where he went, but he was told that Hoffa's body was taken somewhere and cremated. Now, there are many, many law enforcement people who believe that at all. In fact, there were several places near, including a banquet hall not far from there, where there was an incinerator. That was not far from the place that Hoffa was last seen. So some people believe, many serious investigators believe, that they did away with the body through cremation. Then there's a second popular thought, which was actually told by someone else in the mob. They said that Hoffa's body was placed in a steel drum, put on a gateway truck that was owned by the mob, driven all the way to Jersey, placed in the ground near and around a mob-owned landfill that was filled with toxic waste. Fox News even did an investigation on this. They found that there were indeed some steel drums that was buried in the ground near that landfill. Well, it really wasn't surprising that there would be, since it was at that time an illegal dumping place for toxic waste. You see, there's a son of one of the mobsters says his father's witnessed the arrival of Hoffa's body at that dump, and that he also witnessed the burial of that steel drum. Now, while the FBI and authorities have done all kinds of digs on all sort of grounds, including farms, homes, in the public and in non-public areas, well, my friend, to this point, they have not been able to locate his body. Now, their duty demands them to run down all these leads, but my money, my friend, my money is that his body, well, I believe, like so many others in law enforcement, it was cremated. It will never be found. Now, you know, you and I, we do like our stories all to end in such a way that we can tie it up and hand it over in a neat package. But, my friend, a successful hit from the mob is seldom solved, and I doubt that this one ever will. So we took some time to cut through the maze and to give you some food for the thought, we hope. A fascinating crime story with dozens of rabbit holes for you to explore. Hey, let me know what you think about it. What do you think about where Hoffa's body really is? Well, what about lessons to learn? Well, there are plenty of them, but let me share with you one. You see, my friend, while we may think that the bad guys got away with their crime, they really did not. You see, this high-profile case, well, my friend, it brought down heat, so much heat on those that were no doubt involved. Even Frank Sharon himself, he, along with a ton of other of these mobsters, they did end up going to prison. While they could not be convicted for the murder of Hoffa, well, they found all kinds of things under the rugs, and they found all kinds of ways to put these men behind bars, hoping that they would spill their guts about what happened to Hoffa. So, my friend, these people that were involved in this crime, they either went to jail or they were killed by their own because of the paranoid thinking of criminals. So the lesson is this: crime really does not pay. And if you do the play, then you're going to pay. You do the crime, you're going to do the time. My friend, those chickens eventually do come home to roost. So this is Charlie Crimebuster, and this has been the part 2 of the Jimmy Hoffa mystery. Love to hear from you. CharlieCrimebuster@gmail.com. Until this time next time, Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. Well, for the life you save, it really, really, really could be your very own.